Welcome back, people. This is John P. Kelleher from Los Medanos College, and I'm teaching Fire 103, which is Fire Protection Systems and Equipment. I'll be going over Part 2 and Parts 3, which consists of standpipes and fire pumps. They're interconnected because they're all in one quiz, on Quiz 3. And again, this is just a verbal lecture, and you have it on PowerPoint, which is downloaded onto Canvas. And then I'll also be sending out some videos and some other materials. Okay? So let's get to it. Part 2, standpipes. Most buildings over 4 stories have standpipes. Standpipes are required by code in high-rise buildings beyond the reach of fire department aerial ladders. That means basically, in order to fight a fire up on an apartment building above 4 stories, 10 stories, whatever it may be, instead of extending a hose line all the way to 10 stories or 5th floor or whatever, you have a pipe running a riser, like we talked about in sprinklers, that rise from the bottom all the way to the top. And then off each floor, firefighters walk briskly with their equipment, and they walk up and they connect up each floor to a system, and then they fight fire with water flowing up through the standpipe. Okay? It may be the only way to suppress a fire in a high-rise building, because obviously you can't pull an attack line, 100 stories. NFPA 14, know that. NFPA 14 is the standard for installation of standpipe systems and hose. Know that. There are 3 classes of standpipes: Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. Class 1 is for firefighters that have large hose lines. That means the hose lines are 2.5 inch, and they are more advanced, so they know firefighters are used they're used for firefighters. Class 2 standpipes are for citizens and the public, and those are smaller hose lines. There's like 1.5 inch, most like 1.5 inch, and they're single jacketed hose. You'll see those in schools where there'll be a glass container with a hose wrapped around them, and that's how they go fight fire with Class 2. They are being phased out these days because they get old, and as they're strapped, like this, rotate like in a Z pattern. If you pull them and you charge the hose line, they don't often be used. When you charge the hose lines, they break and pop because they've been stuck in that confined space for so long. So they are being phased out. Most of them just have extinguishers in them. But if you see the extinguishers, maybe I show a picture of that later on. Class 3 is for both firefighters and for the citizens and the public. Both have 1.5 inch and 2.5 inch hose lines. Okay? All standpipes, know this, must provide 500 gallons per minute, at least 30 minutes, at a PSI of 65 PSI residual. So all standpipes must provide 500 gallons per minute for at least 30 minutes at 65 PSI residual. Know that. Many standpipes use water from the sprinkler system. So all those connections, hose line, those piping you have for sprinklers are also for standpipes. The water supply for standpipes are, just like sprinklers, public water supplies, i.e. East Bay MUD, East Bay Municipal District, automatic fire pumps, manual fire pumps, pressure tanks, and gravity tanks. The types of standpipe systems are wet and dry. There's not 4 like in sprinklers, there's only 2 types of standpipe systems, wet and dry. Wet pipe standpipe systems, the water supply is open always. It means water's open at all times. Dry pipe standpipe systems, the operation of a valve controlled by an electric switch or other device at each hose station. The dry pipe systems have no permanent water supply and must be completely supplied by firefighters into the FDC, which we learned before, fire department connection. That fire department connection is at the front of the building where the firefighters hook up to, and then plug in the dry pipe system. An example of dry pipe systems in my district was right behind the main station. We had a couple 4 or 5 story apartment buildings, and 1 or 2 of them, they were built in probably like the 40s and 50s. They had standpipes, and here's a standpipe position. You'll see that in the pictures on the PowerPoint, and the connections are right there in front, fire department connections. And you hooked up, and it said dry standpipe, meaning there's no water in them. Meaning the firefighters have to supply from a hydrant to the hydrant to the engine, and then into the standpipe system and flow water, and then you go to wherever the you know, the fire is in the apartment, 4-story apartment at the very corner, hook up to a standpipe connection, and then go fight fire, because your water supply is dry unless it's charged by the fire department to the hydrant, to the engine, to the standpipe system. Okay, that's mean by dry systems. Wet means they're charged all the time, just like a wet sprinkler system like we talked about before. Wet pipe systems have a limited water supply that keeps the riser full. This is also known as primed systems. Know this. Wet pipe systems have a limited water supply that keeps the riser full, also known as primed systems. The wet standpipe system with an automatic water supply is the most desirable. Any floor within 130 feet of standpipe connections are no less than 3 feet high and no more than 5 feet high. So where you connect up to them is between 3 feet and 5 feet where you hook up to it. And again, in the PowerPoint, you'll see pictures of standpipe systems. What else we got here? It is required that 0.434 psi is required to raise water 1 foot. Okay, so that means is, we always say as firefighter is to raise water 1 foot, use half a psi, half a pound. So it says if it's 200 feet times 0.434 psi per foot equals 87 psi. To keep it simple, you're not a fire protection engineer. When you're at the pump, meaning the fire pump, and you're pumping water to the system it is. For imagine it's that dry system we talked about. Well, if you're on 10 stories, right? 10-story building, every foot is a half psi. Okay, every foot. So if it's on 10 stories, that means you need half of 10, because every story is 10 feet, 10 to 12 feet, we say. So 10 stories about 100 feet high, correct? So 100 feet high at the top floor of the 10th floor. And then it takes so much pressure to get that water to flow. So if you want to go up to 10 floors, it's a half pound each foot. So 50 pounds, you're going to need 50 psi just to get pressure up to the 10th floor. So half a pound per psi per foot, and it's basically 100 feet, which is 10 stories. It's usually 10 or 12 feet. You need at least 50 pounds psi to get water, just to get water to the 10th floor. Okay, that's how we kind of ratio. So we always ratio. It says 0.34 psi per foot. We say 0.5. Keep it simple, like us firefighters. Because remember, as I said before, as us firefighters, those firefighters, I'm retired now. Those firefighters, they have to do things at 3 or 4 in the morning, 2 or 3 in the morning. So we keep things simple. Don't make it more complicated than it already is. Keep it simple. Okay, so pressure regulating devices. Know this. And again, it talks about this in what happened in Philadelphia. NFPA 14 requires a pressure regulating device to limit the pressure if the hose outlet exceeds 100 psi. So it stays at 100 psi. So essentially is, we want 100 pounds per square inch at that standpipe, wherever it may be. The one type consists of simple restricting orifice interested in the waterway, and the pressure regulating device is not properly installed or adjusted. It can cause problems, like it did in Philadelphia in 1991, where we lost at One Meridian Plaza, where 3 firefighters passed. And essentially what happened is, those 3 firefighters went up to the 12th or 13th floor in Philadelphia to fight a fire. They charged the hose lines, they charged the lines to the standpipe system. Water raised up to the 13th floor. They hooked up the standpipe connection on the 12th floor, because you always go 1 floor below. The fire's on the 13th, you hook up on the 12th, or 2 floors, either or, 1 or 2 floors. Hooked it up, went up to fight fire on the 13th floor, and as they open up their nozzle, the water just went, kind of dropped, low pressure. And guess what happened to them? Because of low pressure, fire overcame them, and they passed. So the reality is, now with pressure regulating devices, you need at least 100 psi at that point, at the furthest point of the building, wherever it may be. And that means if you're over 100 stories, 150 stories, you need 100 psi at that point. Okay, and that's what they call pressure regulating device. Know that. Fire department connections. Class 1 and Class 3 standpipe systems require 1 or more FDCs, 1 or more fire department connections. We know what those look like. Outside, fire department connections, 2 orifices, right? And you have those connections, 2.5-inch fittings, right? And then the firefighters hook up to that from to the engine, from the fire hydrant to the engine to the FDC. Hose connections at FDCs must have female inlets, and I think we mentioned about sprinklers is water is received on the female inlet, water shot out on the male inlet. So on the end of the hose line where we're going to shoot water out, we have a male inlet or a male outlet, correct? On the inlet when water is being received on the FDC, we have female inlets, water being received into them. So understand that. And again, keep it simple. Fire department operations with the use of standpipes. Fire departments should conduct pre-incident surveys to identify standpipes and record its setup. I knew to this day, on Liberty Avenue, there was 3 apartment buildings, even though 7 years I've been retired, 8 years. I know on Liberty, on the 1200 and 1300 blocks, there was 3 or 4 apartment buildings that had dry standpipes, because I knew my district and I knew the area. So you got to do pre-incident surveys. So that means you know your district and you know what's going on, what's happening in those buildings. Crucial. Got to know your area. So that being said, as fire departments should conduct pre-incident surveys so you know what kind of standpipes they have and such. But you got to know the location of fire department rooms, fire pump rooms. You got to know the size and method of operation for building fire pumps. You need the number of zones serving the high rise. Each zone covers a geographic area. And then obviously the location of your FDC. What we would do is we test each other. Also know is, where's the FDC in front of Lucky's? Where's the FDC in front of Safeway? Where's the FDC in front of Chevron Research? The idea is we got to know where that connection is so that when the big fire hits, we're going to plug in for water supply into that FDC, and we got to know where that is at 3 a.m. The arriving units should perform the following when we're talking about standpipes. They need to identify the floor, fire floor. So that means if you're up on a 10-story building and you count the windows, because that's every floor, right? So this first window, second, third, fourth, seventh. So you get to the 7th. The fire's on the 7th window. That's the 7th floor, right? You ID so the fire's on the 7th floor. Okay, so ID the fire floor first. You establish the control of the lobby. What that means is the lobby is your center. That's your staging area for all your equipment, your personnel, all your equipment as you're going up top. You evaluate conditions on the fire floor as people go up there and check it out. Provide life safety of persons in danger, and you get them out of their area, especially ones from below, and get them down, especially the ones on top as well. Ensure adequate water supply. Make sure you have enough water going up to that location. Provide initial attack on the fire. Put a line on the fire. Check for fire extension and the occupants. Okay? And again, always remember, if it's on the fire floor is on the 7th, you're going to be hooking up on the 6th floor or the 5th floor. Never hook up on the same floor the fire is. Friction loss, what is it? I think we kind of touched on that last part. Friction loss is how pressure diminishes when water is pumped up floor of a building or goes through our orifices like the hose line. Standpipes are fairly small. Be aware with its heights and need for more equipment. So as I mentioned is, every half pound pressure is lost as you go up each foot. Okay? So that's the friction loss. It's holding the water back. So the gravity is pulling the water downwards, correct? It's bringing it down to earth. So what it does is as you pump up, you need a half pounds per square foot. Okay? So if we count 10 floors, which is 10 times 10, 100 feet. We need at least 50 pounds PSI to get the 10th floor. Well, in order to have 100 PSI and 150 PSI, we got to rate that. We got to add the 50 PSI and then the 100 PSI or 150 at the hose line. So at the pump, we're pumping at 200 PSI. Yeah, that makes sense. So that's engineer stuff. That's far for you when you advance in your careers and such. That's the basic stuff we learn as an engineer, that person at the pump. Okay? Firefighters carry certain equipment when fighting a fire of a high-rise building with a standpipe system. They got hose packs, they got valve wheels, they got a nozzle or different types of nozzles. They got pipe wrenches, spanner wrenches, gated Ys. Remember gated Ys? One branching into two, one line branching into two going out. Forcible entry tools and the rope hose tool. Okay, these are all equipment. You should know that. Firefighters must connect their hose to the standpipe connection on the floor below the fire and advance the hose line up to the fire floor. Know that as well. That is critical. Okay, then we got some pictures of standpipes and such. And then you'll see in the PowerPoint, it shows a graphic and a design of what a standpipe looks like. And again, it's the same thing as a riser going up to the building, and it's pretty much the same, may be on the same system as the sprinklers. But as that riser goes up, each floor, and usually the connections are in the stairwells, okay, or in a safe location in that building. So you hook up, or in their separate room if it's not on the stairwell, so that way you can hook up to it safely without getting exposed to fire or heat. Hook up to the connection, hook up, and then advance your hose line to wherever that may be. Okay? So that concludes part 2, okay, of standpipes. And the next segment I'll be doing fire pumps part 3.